Home Studio Start podcast.
All right, so have you ever been mixing a track and you just feel like you're going in circles?
Oh, yeah.
You know, like you're twisting knobs and pushing faders, but you just can't seem to get that pro sound.
Definitely. It's tough.
It's like, I don't know, it's like you're trying to bake a cake without a recipe, you know? You've got all these ingredients, you're kind of throwing them in, but it just doesn't come out like that beautiful, picture-perfect cake you were hoping for.
Yeah, it's missing that special something.
Exactly. And we're talking all about that special something today. Today's deep dive is all about reference tracks, that secret ingredient that can really unlock that professional sound in your mix.
We're talking about getting that tight, punchy, low-end, crystal clear vocals, and just that overall polished vibe that makes a track really pop, really stand out.
And the cool thing is that we're going to break down exactly how these reference tracks actually work, why they're so effective, and how you can start using them today to get your mixes sounding better than ever.
Yeah. And we're going to make it super simple and easy to understand.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it. The first thing we need to talk about is choosing the right reference tracks.
And this is actually super important. It's like choosing the right ingredients, right? If you start with bad ingredients, your cake's not going to taste very good. Same goes for reference tracks.
That's a perfect analogy. So you're sitting there, you're looking at your music library. Where do you even start? What are you looking for in a good reference track?
Well, the first thing I always tell people is to think about the genre or the style of music that you're working on, right? Because if you're making let's say a pop ballad, you're probably not going to want to use a death metal track as your reference.
Unless you're going for a very specific vibe.
Yeah, unless you're going for some like really experimental stuff. But for most cases, yeah, you want to stick to the same genre. So for the pop ballad example, you might look at something like, Adele's Hello or Ed Sheeran's Perfect, tracks with that polished production and that kind of like, powerful emotional resonance that you're going for.
Okay, so you found some tracks in the same genre, but what else should you be listening for? What are those specific things that make a good reference track good? Yeah.
So this is where we get a little more nitty-gritty. Start thinking about the individual elements in those tracks that really grab your attention. Is it the way the drums hit you in the chest? Is it the crystal clear vocals? Or maybe it's the overall sense of space and dimension in the track.
It's like, that thing you always notice when you hear a professionally produced track, like, man, I wish my tracks had that.
Exactly. And the more specific you can get with what you're looking for, the better. Because then you can actually start to emulate those things in your own mix. So let's say you're really drawn to the low end in a particular reference track.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Now, what is it specifically about the low end that you like? Is it the way the bass guitar sits? Is it the punch of the kick drum? Maybe it's the balance between those sub-frequencies and the higher bass frequencies. Once you identify those things, you've got to target a roadmap for your own mixing.
I love that. It's like reverse engineering a great mix. Okay, so we've talked about genre and the specific sonic elements we're looking for. What about the actual quality of the reference track itself? Does that matter?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You want to be using the best possible source material, right?
Yeah.
Because if your reference track is poorly mixed or mastered, you're not going to be able to get a clear picture of what you're aiming for.
Makes sense. So what do you recommend?
Always try to use high-quality audio files like WAV or FLAC files. So lossless formats, meaning they haven't been compressed and they retain all of the original audio information.
Right. And stay away from MP3s. Those are compressed, right?
Right. Yeah. MP3s use lossy compression. Basically, they throw away some of the audio information to make the file size smaller. And sometimes, it's not a huge deal. But when you're trying to really analyze a track, to hear every detail, you want the best possible quality.
Cool. So you found your perfect reference track. It's the same genre as your project. It has all those sonic elements that you love, and it's a high-quality audio file. Now what? Do you just hit play and hope for the best?
Nope. The next step is where the real work begins. It's time to analyze that reference track. And I mean, really dissect it. You're basically becoming a sonic detective.
Putting on your Sherlock Holmes hat, magnifying glass in hand, trying to figure out how this mix was made.
Exactly. And there are a few key areas to focus on. First, listen to the overall balance of the instruments. Is there a clear hierarchy where the lead vocal is front and center and everything else supports it? Or is it more of an even mix where all the instruments have a similar presence? Next, listen to the tonal qualities. What's the overall vibe of the track? Is it bright and airy? Is it warm and full? Is it dark and moody? And again, get specific. What is it about the tonal balance that you like? Is it the presence in the high end? Is it the warmth in the mid-range?
And what about the spatial positioning of the sounds?
Yeah, the stereo image. That's huge. Notice where the different instruments are placed in the stereo field. Are the guitars panned hard left and right? Are the backing vocals spread out wide? Is the lead vocal dead center? Paying attention to this stuff can give you a lot of insight into how the mix was constructed.
So we're basically mapping out the sonic landscape of the reference track.
Exactly, and one of the best tools for this is a spectrum analyzer. Most digital audio workstations, or DAWs, have them built in, or you can get a dedicated plugin. And what this does is it shows you a visual representation of the frequency content of the track.
So it's like looking at a graph of all the different frequencies, showing you where the energy is concentrated.
Right, so you can actually see how much low end there is, how much mid-range, how much high end, and you can compare that to your own mix and see where things line up and where they differ.
That's a great way to get an objective view of the mix. And what about dynamics?
Dynamics are super important too. Dynamics is basically the difference in volume between the loudest and quietest parts of a track. And a well-mixed track will have a good balance of dynamics. It won't be too compressed and squashed, but it'll also have enough energy and punch.
Okay, and how do you analyze dynamics using a reference track?
Just listen to how the energy level changes throughout the track. Notice the parts where the drums really kick in or where the vocals swell, and compare that to your own mix. Does your track have a similar dynamic range? Or is it feeling a bit flat or lifeless in comparison?
And if it is, how do we fix that?
Well, there are a few tools we can use, but one of the most important is compression. Compression basically reduces the dynamic range of a track, making the quieter parts louder and the louder parts quieter. And it can be used in a lot of different ways to really shape the dynamics of a track.
Okay, but isn't too much compression bad?
Yeah, too much compression can definitely make a track sound lifeless and squashed. It's all about finding the right balance. And that's where those reference tracks come in handy again. Listen to how much compression is being used in your reference tracks and try to get a similar feel in your own mix.
And how do we know how much compression is being used? Is there a way to measure that?
You can definitely train your ears to hear it, but there are also some visual tools that can help. Some compressors have meters that show you how much gain reduction is happening. And you can also use a tool called a dynamic range meter to measure the overall dynamic range of a track.
So basically, the goal is to get the dynamics of your mix to feel similar to the dynamics of your reference track.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You don't want to copy it exactly, but you want to get into the same ballpark.
Awesome. Okay, so we've analyzed our reference track. We've got a good understanding of its balance, its tonality, its dynamics, and its spatial positioning. Now what? How do we actually start to apply all of this to our own mix?
So now it's time to start tweaking and adjusting your mix to get it closer to that reference track. And this is where it can get a bit technical, but don't worry, we're going to break it down step by step.
Perfect. So what's the first thing we should focus on?
One of the most important things is matching the tonal balance. And remember, tonal balance is basically the overall EQ curve of a track, the balance of low, mid, and high frequencies.
Right. So how do we match the tonal balance of our reference track?
Well, the first step is to listen very carefully to your reference track and pay attention to the overall tonal qualities. Is it bright and airy? Is it warm and full? Is it dark and punchy?
Right, we talked about that earlier.
Exactly. And now we want to see how that translates to the actual frequency content of the track. So this is where we can use a spectrum analyzer again. Load up your reference track and your mix in your DAW and put a spectrum analyzer on both.
And then we can compare the two, right?
Right. Look at the shape of the frequency curves. Notice where the bass frequencies are most prominent in the reference track, how the mid-range frequencies are balanced, and where the high frequencies have their peaks. This gives you a visual target to aim for.
Okay, and then we use EQ to try and match that target, right?
Exactly. Now, you don't want to copy the reference track's EQ curve exactly. That'll probably sound weird and unnatural. It's more about using the reference track as a guide to help you identify problem areas in your own mix.
So if our mix is lacking low end compared to the reference track, we might boost the bass frequencies a bit?
Right. Or if our mix is sounding harsh or brittle, we might need to cut some of the high frequencies.
And the spectrum analyzer helps us see exactly where those adjustments need to be made.
Exactly. It's a really powerful tool. But remember, always use your ears as the final judge. Don't just rely on the visual feedback. Keep switching back and forth between your mix and your reference track and make sure that your ears are happy with the results.
Okay, so we've matched the tonal balance. What's next?
Next up is dynamics and loudness matching. And this is where we can really make our mix sound competitive with professionally released music.
Okay, so remind us again, what are dynamics and loudness and why are they so important?
Dynamics, as we talked about earlier, is the difference in volume between the loudest and quietest parts of a track. And it's what gives music that sense of energy and emotion. Loudness, on the other hand, is the overall perceived volume of a track, how loud it sounds compared to other tracks.
Right, so dynamics is about the variation in volume and loudness is about the overall level.
Exactly. And when you're mixing, you want to pay attention to both. You want your mix to have a good dynamic range so it doesn't sound flat and squashed. But you also want it to be loud enough so that it can compete with commercially released music.
Okay, and how do we achieve that?
Well, for dynamics, we can use compression, which we talked about earlier. Compression helps control the dynamic range of a track, making the quieter parts louder and the louder parts quieter. And for loudness, we can use a tool called a limiter. A limiter prevents the audio signal from exceeding a certain level, and it can be used to increase the overall loudness of a track without introducing distortion.
Okay, so compression for dynamics, limiting for loudness. And how do we know how much compression and limiting to use?
Well, again, that's where those reference tracks come in handy. Listen to how much compression and limiting is being used in your reference tracks and try to get a similar feel in your own mix.
So it's all about using our ears and comparing our mix to those reference tracks.
Right. But there are also some technical tools that can help us out. For example, there's a measurement called LUFS, which stands for loudness units relative to full scale. And this is the industry standard for measuring loudness.
Okay, so LUFS is basically a way to measure how loud a track is.
Exactly. And most DAWs have LUFS meters that you can use to measure the loudness of your mix. And you can compare that to the LUFS level of your reference tracks.
So if our reference track has a LUFS level of, let's say, -14, we would try to get our mix to have a similar LUFS level.
Right. Now, you don't have to match it exactly, but you want to get into the same ballpark.
Got it. Okay, so we've covered tonal balance, dynamics, and loudness. What else can we learn from reference tracks?
The last thing we're going to talk about is stereo imaging in depth. And this is what can really make a mix sound immersive and three-dimensional.
Okay, so what are stereo imaging in depth and why are they important?
Stereo imaging is basically how sounds are placed in the stereo field, how wide or narrow the mix sounds, and depth is the perceived distance of sounds, how close or far away they sound.
Okay, so stereo imaging is left and right and depth is front and back.
Exactly. And a well-mixed track will have a good balance of both. It will sound wide and spacious, but it will also have a sense of depth and dimension.
And how do we achieve that?
Well, for stereo imaging, one of the most important things is panning. Panning is basically placing sounds in different positions in the stereo field. You can pan sounds hard left, hard right, or anywhere in between. And by panning different instruments to different positions, you can create a sense of width and space in your mix.
Okay, so panning is like creating a sonic panorama.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And there are a few different approaches to panning. Some mixers like to pan things very wide, while others prefer a more narrow mix.
And how do we know what's right for our mix?
Again, listen to your reference tracks. Pay attention to how the different instruments are panned. Are the guitars panned wide? Or the vocals centered? Try to get a feel for the overall stereo width of the mix.
And then we can try to emulate that in our own mix.
Exactly. And there are also some plugins that can help us out. For example, there are stereo widening plugins that can make a sound wider without actually panning it.
Oh, cool. And what about depth? How do we create a sense of depth in our mix?
Depth is largely created using reverb and delay. Reverb is basically the sound of a space, the way sound bounces around a room, and delay is a repeated echo of a sound. And by using reverb and delay on different instruments, you can create a sense of depth and dimension in your mix.
So if we want a sound to sound far away, we might add more reverb or delay.
Right, and if we want a sound to sound close, we might use less reverb or delay.
Got it. And again, we can use our reference tracks as a guide for how much reverb and delay to use.
Absolutely. Listen to how much reverb and delay is being used in your reference tracks and try to get a similar feel in your own mix.
Awesome. This has been such a great deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about how to use reference tracks to improve my mixes.
Yeah, me too. It's amazing how much we can learn from listening to professionally produced music.
So what's a key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with today?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. If you're serious about taking your mixes to the next level, start using reference tracks. It's one of the best things you can do to improve your mixing skills.
And it's not as complicated as it might seem, right?
Right. It just takes a little bit of practice and patience. But once you get the hang of it, it's a game changer.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today. This has been a fantastic deep dive into the world of reference tracks.
Thanks for having me.
And for everyone listening, I encourage you to go out and try this for yourself. Choose some reference tracks that you love and really start to analyze them. Listen to the balance, the tonality, the dynamics, the stereo imaging, and the depth, and then start applying what you've learned to your own mixes. You might be surprised at how much of a difference it makes. And one final thought to leave you with: think about how powerful it is that we can actually deconstruct a professionally produced track, break it down into its individual elements, and then use that knowledge to improve our own music. It's really a remarkable process. So keep experimenting, keep learning, and keep creating amazing music. Thanks for listening.